to another affiliate presentation from Avant, hosted by Tools of Practice. We are blessed again to have Amy Cutter with us, an expert in laser that's going to go through an awesome presentation. And rather than delay it, I'll just give it over to Amy.
Thanks, Paul. So today I'm going to talk about a few different things that people may consider as separate topics, but they are so codependent, they really could have their own 12-step program. I'm going to make an audacious statement and tell you that by treating just these few systems, we could improve all of the top neurological disorders. Because of new technology and studies, we may be able to finally begin to understand the etiology of most of these horrible diseases that, as much as we know about MS, ALS, Parkinson's, and Alzheimer's, no one can say where they start. They just slowly torture the lives of the people and families of those who get their diagnosis. But we can change all of that. And the best news is it won't take billions of dollars to do it. By improving the quality of just a few basic things, you could treat almost every neurological disease that we know of. So what are these few basic things? First, we must understand what microglial priming is, and we'll get there. Once you get that, you'll see the importance of two of the other important topics that we're going to talk about, and those are sleep and hormones, which are all dependent on lymphatic drainage. It's a little bit like being in an escape room situation. Once you start figuring out what one thing is, it leads to the next one, and so on and so on. Each clue independently may not look like much, but when the pieces come together in order, they begin to look like something that can be added to, right? And so, of course, we're going to talk about how photobiomodulation helps each step of the way. And I know that it sounds too good to be true or too easy, but let's just start to break it down. So this is one of my favorite photos. I wrote a protocol called Deflame Your Brain, so that makes sense, right? I've used it as good visual for inflammation. So if we could see our organs like this, we would not all be as sick as we have become. We would immediately and persistently put out the fires, right? But we can't see it. In fact, I think it looks more like this. And at first I thought that this photo was too dark to use, but then I realized that it is the perfect photo for the metaphor that inflammation is like a ninja, because you can see them, but they hide really well. They slip in through the window or the side door without you even noticing, and could wreck your whole world if they wanted to before we even realize that they're there. And while we can't see the fire in our brains, it is no doubt there for most of us. Those windows and the doors that the ninja assassins, otherwise known as inflammation, are utilizing to gain access to our lives are things like the foods we eat. And by the way, I chose this photo specifically because even though it looks pretty healthy, all of these foods can cause inflammation. I can't imagine why people are so confused and the ninjas are successful. It also comes from environmental toxins, could be physical blows, or emotional trauma. The initial reaction to all of these things is the same. They all create inflammation. The number one therapeutic benefit of utilizing photobiomodulation is, you guessed it, reduced inflammation. So photobiomodulation leads to increased cellular signaling, increased ATP, increased nitric oxide, and a change in reactive oxygen species. And it does all of this very quickly. It's really kind of a big deal. So we mentioned physical blows. Let's talk about this for a moment. I come to you as the kid who literally cried if it rained on game day because I loved soccer so much. American football is such an integral part of my family life that The thought of not having it anymore would damage the very fabric of my family gatherings. I am not anti-sports. Boxing and MMA kind of make me cringe, and I can't watch it, but each his own. It seems a little bit off topic, I know, but it's important, I think, to understand the client and where they are coming from and what they do when assessing for a treatment plan. We must think globally and also microscopically. Are they sleeping? How's their stress level? How long has this been going on? What does their diet look like? Are they drinking enough water? Are they consuming lots of alcohol or tea or coffee, right? There's a lot to think about. I'm not suggesting that we do away with sports, but I'm sure that I'm not alone when I watch someone get injured that I think, man, I hope he's okay. And the next words are, he needs laser. To be clear, what they need is photobiomodulation. Laser's not a term that the industry researchers are utilizing any longer. The unit is a laser. The treatment is photobiomodulation. To keep everyone on the same page, we have to agree on words and their meanings. Actors use terms like stage left and stage right so that when a director or a choreographer yells instructions, people are not crashing into each other because they thought, oh, I thought you meant my left. Acupuncturists, doctors, musicians, every profession has a dictionary unto themselves to keep everyone on the same page. Well, the powers that be at Walt, formerly known as the World Association of Laser Therapy, have changed the wording to the World Association of Photobiomodulation Therapy to be very clear about what it is that we are discussing, but without losing the very cool acronym. They just decided to accentuate the L in lation. This isn't the first time that we've changed the definition of what we're going to be doing without losing the acronym. In fact, laser itself was initially light amplification by the stimulated emission of radiation, right? Or more accurately, it's oscillation by the stimulated emission of radiation. We aren't amplifying the light, we are changing the oscillation or the frequency of it to stimulate the biology that we're pointing it at. But they realized that the acronym would now become loser and they decided to leave it alone. So I joke about this and it seems like a rant, I know, but it's really important that as we as practitioners understand what it is that we are doing to gain insight as to how to best do it. We are aiming photons of light to our biology to modulate it, or photobiomodulation. So if you're going to heal by matching the frequency of a cell, we need to zoom out a little bit and take a look at the big picture and think, well, where does that come from? Or how does that system work? And get really specific and then program our units to get the most bang in the shortest amount of time. Because you get in, you get out what you put in, right? The more specific we can be, the more powerful our results will be. You get out what you put in is one of my favorite sayings because it holds true no matter what you're talking about. If you put a ton of effort into anything, grades, relationships, dance moves, or lasers, you will yield better results. If you're really general with laser codes, you get generalized improvement. You get really, really specific with frequency codes, you get better results. The key is in understanding what is happening so we can become really specific. The first thing that we need to understand is microglial priming. So to break it down, let's look at microglial priming. I first encountered this idea from B2B Health Systems, and for anyone who's seen a presentation from me, you've seen this slide before. Forgive me for not getting a new one. It's just the perfect metaphor to understand how glial cells work. So glial cells are supporting cells outnumbering primary neurons 10 to 1. And although they're often referred to as janitor cells of the central nervous system, their role goes way beyond just cleaning up the brain. They are the Bruce Banner of the central nervous system, right? So once the glial cells go into the protect Hulk mode, they're primed. Hulk protects us, but he can also cause collateral damage. He needs to be able to go back to Bruce Banner. Glial priming occurs when the body detects an issue. The difference between a high impact blow, a food allergy, or an infection is similar initially, so the reaction is the same. And that's the reason that I use this slide in so many of my presentations, because it's relevant to so many conditions. The Hulk comes out in defense. Photobiomodulation can help return the glial cells from Hulk state back into Bruce Banner state. Microglia and astrocytes, which is actually another form of a glial cell, communicate directly in a back and forth fashion with each other. Once they're activated, they're more sensitive to environmental changes. This is how they go from Bruce Banner to the Incredible Hulk. However, because of the spiraling nature of the relationship, it can become challenging to return the Hulk to Bruce Banner. But remember what we said, photobiomodulation leads to increased cellular signaling, increased ATP, increased nitric oxide, and a change in reactive oxygen species. All of these are beneficial to aid the process of returning the Hulk to Bruce Banner. I highly recommend this book for anybody who's interested in more information about microglia. This book is by Donna Jackson Nakazawa, and in it she says microglial cells sculpt our brains in a way that have profound lifelong effects on our mental health and well-being, and then goes on to say microglia are both, in the simplest terms, the assassins of the self and the guardian of the self, and science may be able to bring them back into homeostasis. So remember what we said in that last slide. Initially, the brain can't tell the difference between a high impact blow, a food allergy, or an infection, so the reaction is the same. Photobiomodulation is one of the pieces of the science puzzle that will revolutionize the way that we treat everything from arthritis to depression. This is just another good image of how I think about glial cells. They are the good and the bad wrapped into one. Anytime I see things cross over in fields, I figure that the universe is trying to give me a clue. Sometimes the clue is so obvious, it's akin to being smacked in the face with a hammer, but we don't always pay attention to the world around us, right? So why is microglial priming so important? Because the lymphatic system is managed by the brain's glial cells. In 2012, they discovered our brain has its own unique waste removal system that is responsible for removing more than half of your brain's amyloid proteins. And I quote, "The highly organized system acts like a series of pipes that piggyback on the brain's blood vessels, sort of a shadow plumbing system that seems to serve much the same function in the brain as the lymph system does in the rest of the body to drain away waste products." This work shows that the brain is cleansing itself in a more organized way and on a much larger scale that has been realized previously. End quote. So in 2017, two of the major researchers from that original study wrote a paper called Brain Drain to explain what it is that they discovered with 5 years more knowledge behind them. It's really well written and in a very easy to understand language. It describes the actions of what is happening and why they came to the hypothesis that they did before they started. So in this photo, the astrocytes, and you can see why they say they kind of piggyback on the brain's blood vessels, because the end feet of the cells surround the blood vessels called an astrocyte wrap. And that creates this periarterial and perivenous space. If you've ever been in a tunnel that you could drive through, and you could picture it with me if you would, the space that your car is driving on, like the road, is the equivalent of the actual vein or the artery. But if you look, you realize that there's space for the workers to walk through in case of an emergency, right? This is the equivalent of the periarterial or perivenous space. And this, the cerebral spinal fluid, excuse me, moves out of the astrocytes and by what they call convective flow spills out over the brain tissue. Now let's pause for a second there, because convective flow means they rely on the pumping of the arteries to move the fluid. It isn't being pumped directly, but because it's near the artery and it's pulsing, the fluid flows away from the artery over the brain tissue, like a ripple in a pond when you throw a pebble in it. The water will ripple in an outward fashion. Okay, now that the cerebral spinal fluid is on the brain tissue, it picks up the waste such as beta amyloid plaques and things like that. And now the cerebral spinal fluid containing the waste is forced into the paravenous space and is eventually dumped into the lymph system and back into the bloodstream. So hopefully I was able to break that down enough that we're all on the same page. But the most important thing to recognize is all of this is initiated in the subarachnoid space. So when we're sleeping, the brain shrinks ever so slightly and opens that space up for all of this to take place. That creates a vacuum effect that also helps this fluid move about in the brain. So if you aren't sleeping deep enough for this reaction to start, then it doesn't happen. The daily implications of that, maybe not a big deal. Maybe you have a little brain fog or some sluggishness, but a week or so without sleep, and now you're starting to ask for trouble. 20 or 30 years of this, and now we're starting to look at amyloid plaque buildup that's strong enough to start occluding nerve functions and or create lesions in myelin sheaths of the neurons near the mountains of waste. The abstract for this paper is one of the most succinct explanations that I have ever read. Ready? An internal plumbing system rids the brain of toxic wastes. Sleep is when this cleanup ritual occurs. Enough said. Talk about keeping it simple. So now we know the next place we have to look to improve the glymphatic system, right? But first, I want to look at a couple of people who've been on this trail for a long time and how they may not have even known why. The first is John Rady. He's author of over 60 peer-reviewed articles and 11 books, including one of the most influential books of my life, Spark. This book predates the glymphatic system discovery. In it, he explains that exercise improves neurotransmission and increases BDNF, but also that it seems to incredibly change the physical manifestation of several neurological disorders and hormone issues in menopausal women, which I can attest to. And that makes so much sense, especially considering what that we now know is what is driving the glymphatic system is arterial pressure, right? Exercise maintains and improves mean arterial blood pressure. So the stronger the convective flow between the periarterial and paravenous space you have on the brain tissue, the better your cleaning power. It's like the difference between washing the deck with a hose or a power washer. But if you aren't getting that deep delta brainwave sleep, where that body is healing itself, it's as if somebody kinked up your hose and the pressure can't build up, so the surface doesn't get very clean. The implications of not cleaning the brain on a regular basis are pretty hefty indeed. So the second woman that I want to talk about is this woman. Her name is Li Wei Sai. She's a neuroscientist who has been associated with the likes of Mass General, Harvard Medical, and MIT, who in 2016 published findings that gamma waves are deficient in Alzheimer's patients. Using light and music, she matches the brain waves to make them stronger and plays music that pulses at 40 beats per minute or 40 hertz. She explains that not only does it improve synapses, it behaves as a vasodilator, which we know allows the brain to remove toxins. So, in a seemingly unrelated study, she explains how light frequencies at specific hertz increase vasodilation, which we all now understand is part of the lymphatic system waste removal in the brain. And just like that, several worlds are connected in science. So, let's talk about sleep. Different states of consciousness produce different brain waves and different wavelength dominances, right? So, for example, brain waves are most prevalent when you're alert. Um, that's the beta waves, right? That's alert and awake, and you're really on your game and you're problem solving. Alpha is more alert but relaxed, kind of like having a glass of wine. You're still awake, but you're just chilling. Theta is really relaxed, and this is really typically where dreams happen. And then there's delta, and that's the deepest and the slowest that we currently know of, and that is where the body is repairing itself. None of these wavelengths ever shut down completely, but they ebb and flow like an orchestra. Sometimes the flutes are playing, sometimes it's a guitar solo. Brain mapping and neurofeedback could fairly accurately let you know where your brain is and help the brain to perform optimally when you want it to. But I don't have really easy access to that. So instead, I use photobiomodulation. It's like the conductor that helps the wavelengths play when they should. Remember, it doesn't overcorrect. And based on the knowledge that your body knows what to do, but sometimes we have obstacles that prevent the body from performing optimally. When we match the frequencies that we want to speak to, we strengthen that frequency and the body does the rest. You can laser the brain waves gamma, beta, alpha, theta, and delta. My client said that when she used brainwave codes, it felt as if her brain remembered how to go to sleep when she wanted it to. So if you have a patient who is consistently not getting into that deep recovery sleep, then the lymphatic system isn't able to perform optimally. Years of this could explain why certain neurological disorders are thought to have been developing for decades before symptoms appear. Oftentimes, once there's a diagnosis, reversal's really challenging. Even just on the short term, right? A patient has trouble sleeping because they have bursitis and it's so bad that they can't get comfortable. A few weeks of this can be really detrimental to their overall health and well-being, as well as their moods and the overall outlook on life, right? Because we know pain can be exhausting. So set the laser to bursitis and let it do its thing. But remember how physics works, right? When a frequency is weakening or dying, the only way to strengthen it is to match it. With this premise in mind, I use photobiomodulation to treat not only the bursitis, but I would also use it and music to match the frequency of all the brain waves. It won't overcorrect. It's all about biomodulation, or in our case, photobiomodulation. We need to get them sleeping. So something else to consider is nutrition. So there's definite nutrition for sleep hygiene. And I will tell you that almost everything on this slide is directly from one online source called Healthline.com. I cannot vouch for them other than to say it was well written and had a ton of information. The link is in my references slide. I just thought it was different enough that I wanted to include it in here. I feel a little bit like we keep saying the same things over and over again, but a few of these I had never heard before, so forgive me if they're incorrect or you have already heard them. I will always qualify if there's a source that is less than what I would qualify as scientifically studied. So that said, here we go. Almonds. They're a source of melatonin and sleep enhancing mineral magnesium, right? Two properties that make them a great food to eat before bed. Magnesium, their role in promoting sleep is thought to be related to its ability to reduce inflammation. Additionally, it may help reduce levels of the stress hormone cortisol, which is known to interrupt sleep. I'm kind of partial to magnesium L-threonate, and I can attest to the fact that it has also helped with constipation, PMS symptoms that made getting my period a non-event. And I want you to remember too that periods are not supposed to be these horrible things that women just have to suffer through. A very good portion of the American population has a magnesium deficiency. And the three main symptoms are headache, constipation, and muscle cramps. So it's thought to promote sleep by reducing inflammation and reducing your cortisol levels. Turkey, high protein levels, right? And tryptophan is also why turkey works so fabulously. Chamomile tea contains antioxidants that may promote sleepiness, and drinking it has been shown to improve overall sleep quality. Specifically, chamomile tea contains apigenin. That's an antioxidant that binds to certain receptors in your brain that may promote sleepiness and reduce insomnia. Tart cherry juice, I didn't know this one, contains the sleep promoting hormone melatonin and may help induce a good night's sleep. Fatty fish. They're a great source of vitamin D and omega-3 fatty acids, both of which have properties that may improve the quality of your sleep. Salmon, herring, and black cod are three of the most common fatty fish. Walnuts have a few properties that may promote better sleep. For instance, they're a great source of melatonin and healthy fats. However, there are no studies to confirm that. And I was a little shocked by that. Passion flower tea. This is one that I had never heard of before. It also contains apigenin and has the ability to increase GABA production. This may influence sleep. And in this article, it said that there was a 7-day study of 41 adults who drank a cup of passion flower tea before bed, and they rated their sleep quality significantly better when they drank the tea compared to when they didn't drink the tea. But more is definitely needed to be definitive about that. But it is thought to reduce anxiety by binding to those receptors in your brain. Are you ready for this one? White rice. This one was wild to me because my husband graduated from the Institute of Integrative Nutrition, and one of the basic concepts that they taught there is that white rice is no bueno because it has its bran and germs removed. But one study compared the sleep habits of 1,848 people based on their intake of rice, bread, or noodles. Higher intake of rice was associated with better sleep than bread or noodles, including longer sleep duration. The article does go on to say that this should be done in moderation because of the low fiber and nutrients, but I thought that was fun. Okay, so now we get the connection between microglial priming and sleep, as well as the brain waves, but let's assume that your client's sleeping just fine and they are still stuck. So remember what we said about the glymphatic system. This cerebrospinal fluid containing waste is forced into that paravenous space and is eventually dumped into the lymphatic system and then back into the bloodstream. So if they're sleeping great, but there still seems to be a backup, we need to look at the system that it is dumping into. So think about the lymphatic system as a one-way highway of vessels that transport your lymph fluid. We know that lymph is comprised of white blood cells that help clear the body of waste material. I seem to be pretty big on driving metaphors today with tunnels and now highways. All right, let's just go with it. So remember that it's a one-way highway. The lymph nodes are exit and exit ramps, right? Or exit and entrance ramps for the highway. Kelly Kennedy, who has dubbed herself the lymph queen, says that you must clear the off ramps or there's going to be a backup in traffic, and that will eventually block the highway too, which makes a lot of sense. The order is important because of the way that the flow goes and the pressure is light. Think deep enough to move the sludge off a stream, but not deep enough to stir up the silt on the bottom. I recommend finding a practitioner who specializes in lymphatic drainage for serious issues, but for homework and to just start it all moving, you could begin here. So we're going to start with the collarbone that's just above your collarbone with your fingers directly under your ears and gently pump towards your back. Then your ears, that's the junction of the earlobe and the jaw. So again, just very lightly pumping in there. You don't want to get too hard. Then the bra strap, women understand this one. I explained that it's between the shoulder and the collarbone where your bra strap would lay if you're wearing one. It's easiest to use the opposite hand and place your fingers there and gently pull towards your collarbone in a pumping fashion. Your armpit, that's the most challenging one. You put your finger right up into your armpit and push up as if you wanted your finger to come through the top of your shoulder in a gentle pumping fashion. And then the xiphoid process and belly button, you're going to split the difference there and place the back of your fingers together and pump directly towards your spine. Remember, keep it gentle. And the inguinals, this is the seam of your leg where your torso and your leg meet. You're going to go to the leg side and gently pump towards the torso from the top of the seam by the hip or the iliac crest to the groin. Then the knee, the popliteal fossa, right? This one is easiest to do while you're sitting, especially if there's any balance issues. And the ankle, this is also just a pretty simple milking of the Achilles tendon, and it's also easiest done when you're sitting down. After lymphatic pumping, I encourage people to bounce lightly on the balls of your feet just to create a little jarring effect. You can also suggest a few minutes on a rebounder if they have access to one, although there can be issues with rebounders, so whatever makes you comfortable suggesting. But by pointing the laser at the largest lymph nodes to the area of involvement, right? So we're going to think axillary node for bursitis in the shoulder. Right? You can treat the stagnation and switch the unit to bursitis and do 2 minutes there. The order of the treatment in that case would be up to you. Remember, we're looking at the individual. There is no cookie cutter formula. We just want to get it in there and start experimenting. So after you've cleaned all of the exit ramps with the laser on the stand and the client supine on the table, you're going to position the laser on one side of the client and have them turn their head to the opposite side. You'd set the laser to lymphatic and turn it on when you're ready. You have your female clients place their hands over their own breast tissue. So standing at the end of the head of the table, you're going to place your palms on the anterior upper thoracic region with the fingers spread and you're pointed laterally on the patient's chest, right? So the thenar and hypothenar eminences should contact just below the clavicle on ribs 2, 3, and 4. You have your client take a deep breath in and gently compress the rib cage in a rhythmic fashion at about 120 beats per minute. The client continues to breathe normally and it'll sound like, right? That's pretty quick. So pay attention to your client tolerance and fatigue. If it looks like they're uncomfortable, try something else. Communication's always a big deal. And then you can try the thoracic vacuum. This one is very much like the thoracic pumping technique where the patient or the client is supine. Women are covering their own breast tissue with their hands and you position your hands above them just below the clavicles. Excuse me. The difference here, I'm going to take a sip of water. Isn't it always when you're recording something? Sorry about that. So, where are we? The difference, oh my goodness. Here we are. The difference is that when you have your client inhale and then exhale, you're going to just compress the rib cage in a decent amount of pressure. And then you're going to ask them to inhale again, but this time don't let your pressure up, right? So they have to breathe in against your pressure. And then as they exhale and inhale a third time, about a third of the way through, you're you're going to quickly grab your hands up, like pull your hands back. So as they're inhaling quickly, it creates a vacuum flow. So it sounds like, right? So as they're inhaling, there's this massive like flow through the lymph and everything starts circulating again. It's wonderful. For self-care and in the singing world, I learned this technique from the amazing Carrie Cole, who is a vocal instructor and business coach extraordinaire in New York City. She taught us that a modified version of this is to stand with your hands really high on your own rib cage, just below your breast, not the bottom of the ribs or on the waist, right? And inhale, then exhale and compress your hands to squeeze the rib cage. Then breathe in without releasing the pressure and forcing those intercostals to work really hard to open up the rib cage. Then you exhale and inhale a few times in the same fashion, not releasing the pressure and really making the body work for it. And then you can just let go, release really quickly in the middle of the third or fourth inhale. It's not as effective as having a partner do this with you because you kind of know it's coming, but it does help to develop that thoracic cage strength and allows the lymph to circulate better. If you're going to do it this way and you have a laser, you can just point it at your diaphragm on a stand while you're doing it. Pedal pumping, much the same fashion as thoracic pumping, the patient's supine and has their feet in dorsiflexion. Place the laser in the stand and point it at the nearest large exit ramp. So for lower extremities, it's usually either the inguinals or the popliteals, and I just said it's a lymphatic. Place your hands on the plantar surface. You gently rock the feet at the same time so that the entire body has a gentle wave flow and let it naturally bounce back. It's very gentle, but it's firm enough to create movement. And this is a teachable moment, by the way, for family members to do to one another. Alternatively, you can lay supine on any flat surface. The floor is generally better than a bed, just because it's harder. And you kind of press your own feet back and forth into and out of dorsiflexion and extension to create a nice lymphatic flow. And this empowers people to have tools to take control of their own health and really become partners in their own healing abilities with you and your office. So hormone balancing, as nothing in the body happens without a cascade of hormones to initiate a reaction, we should almost always perform a hormone balance on patients. This entails lasering the most hormone producing or hormone influenced organs to bring them into homeostasis. So first and foremost, I want you to stimulate the brain. I point the laser at the suboccipital muscles in an upward direction. So think cranial nerves, brainstem. Alternately, you can point it under the chin and tip the head up. I usually do this for about a minute. My protocols have them listed as hormone balance A and hormone balance B, so you can just do one and then click and go right to the next one. But then you're going to change those frequencies of the laser and point it at the organs, starting with your thyroid, liver, spleen, kidney, adrenals, testes for men, obviously, and ovaries and uterus for women. And I want you to start slow. So 45 seconds or so for the first time is fine, and then build up the time in later sessions. So if they come once a month, you could do 45 seconds the first time and then maybe a minute the next time and go from there. It's very powerful. And you won't notice anything right away, but it's the most amazing tool that I think that I have. So let's talk about the itis family. These are the most common of the inflammatory conditions. The major ones in my practice are bursitis, arthritis, tendonitis. I get a lot of high impact blows like sports injuries and car accidents, but I've also seen some strokes and neurological disorders like MS and Parkinson's and ALS and dementia. And though we've already discussed that inflammation is the beginning of all issues, this kind of brings us back to the slide with all the horrific sports injuries. So understanding what is happening by what happened to them will help your treatment plan. By thinking about the overall process of inflammation, we can address the issue on a systemic level and then get really specific and treat the issue. The patient who comes in with bursitis may not need a hormone balance as much as the patient who just got a concussion on the field, right? So by being aware of what is happening pathologically, that's going to help you get really, really specific. If your patient has osteoarthritis, then not only is it inflammation in the articulation, but it's also a degradation of cartilage. So if you simply set the laser for arthritis and wait a few minutes, it will change the way it feels. But by thinking about what's happening, you can also laser for cartilage, right? So if you point and shoot only, you will get good results. If you start by passively moving the joint, then actively moving the joint while you're lasering, you will almost always get even better results. Now, when I say that, I don't mean that the client's going to be ready for active movement the first time that you laser them. Some might be, but some might not be. So you have to kind of play this case dependent. So if there's been an injury or something, you probably don't want to move that. And if it's broken, you certainly don't want to move it, right? You want to immobilize. That's kind of the only time I really love immobilization is when there's something is broken. Otherwise, I think movement is a wonderful thing for the body, but you're going to start slow, right? So do 30 seconds or so where you're just pointing the laser at them and you're not doing anything, you're just waiting. And then you can kind of passively move the joint a little bit. And if that seems to be okay and not painful, then you can ask them to actively move it, right? That's the progression of where we're going with this. Sometimes you can accomplish all of that in one session. Sometimes it takes a few sessions and they can build up to that. So that's for osteoarthritis, but rheumatoid arthritis is caused by an overactive immune system. So lasering for cartilage may help in the short term, but in this case, you're better off treating immune stimulation, right? While it isn't up to most of the people in this audience to prescribe medical marijuana, there is plenty of evidence surrounding it that it is effective because it binds to cannabinoid receptors in the body, and that suppresses pain perception in the body. It prevents immune cells from producing pro-inflammatory cytokine molecules, which play a major role in inflammation, and so does photobiomodulation. These receptors are in the skin, so topicals can be very effective, as can laser. But most of the time, I don't associate slathering products on my face as a true effective treatment. If my skin is dry, what I really need is water, right? But in this case, just putting something on your skin, like a CBD cream or lotions, can also be very effective. So talking about dehydrated, when you are dehydrated, the sensory receptors in the hypothalamus, which is the thirst center, signal the release of antidiuretic hormones. This particular hormone reaches the kidney and triggers aquaporin, which is a special channel that allows blood to retain water. When you're dehydrated, your brain tissues shrink and you need to work extra hard to accomplish a task. And I know it sounds funny because I said that shrinking brain when you're sleeping is great, but that's a hydrated thing with lots of water. This is like shrinkage like the earth does when there's no water. If you've ever seen a drought kind of land, nothing's going to happen there, nothing's going to flow, nothing's going to work well. Shrinkage of brain tissue has an impact on the vernacular volume of your brain, where the cerebral spinal fluid is also present, and that cerebral spinal fluid is necessary for your brain to get the essential nutrients and flush away your waste. Dehydration affects your mood, it reduces your cognitive skills, and it affects your memory. So for this person, like who's really dehydrated, aside from counseling them about different ways to get water into their system, even if it means adding fruit juice to get it into them, like I would laser their kidneys. And I would try lasering for an electrolyte balance. Again, not to be a broken record or beat the dead horse, but hormone balancing. We want to get photobiomodulation into that hypothalamus and modulate significant change in the system ASAP. This is Sir Vegas. He is the one that I compare to the guy in the movies based on Victorian royalty shows like Victoria and Bridgerton. Yes, that is my total guilty pleasure. But this is the guy who's in touch with everyone but has the ear of the queen. He lets the queen, also known as your brain, know what's going on in just about the entire body, right? The vagus nerve runs from the brainstem to the colon and makes pit stops a lot into lots of organs in between. So improving vagal tone will help the brain's awareness of the body systems and what's going on in it. Yoga, massage, breathing techniques, and cold showers can all improve vagal tone and are great homework when you're not in the office. But when you do have them in your office, get some photobiomodulation into that body. You can start at the base of the neck and follow the pathway, right? From the SCM, it exits and then it goes down to the diaphragm, and you can follow it all the way down. And this, by the way, is very similar to the lymphatic exits. So by lasering one, you're kind of getting both. My unit has the capability of switching from red to infrared every 30 seconds, which I think is the coolest thing I've ever seen. So that's what I do, because the red and infrared have different but overlapping benefits, right? There's a lot of evidence that shows that pulsing is definitely the way to go with regards to lasering. But don't make this too complicated. You can set it to muscle. Incorporating deep breathing exercises while you're lasering is always a good way to stack your therapies, and they make for really, really good homework too. So your breathing stuff, this is the box breathing technique, which is always really good, and that's in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4. There's also you can have your patient lay on the belly if they can't breathe into their diaphragm, and then flip over and see if they can control it. Once they can and control, actually breathe into their diaphragm, then they can practice breathing in for 5 or out for 10, or actually any amount of time, as long as you're exhaling for twice as long as you're inhaling. That's great for vagal toning. And these are both really good for panic attacks. So what is the rule of 3-3-3 for panic attacks? You're going to look around. This is when you're in the middle of something that's really stressful and you feel like you might be triggered, or whatever vernacular you want to use, right? So you're going to look around and name 3 things that you see, then name 3 sounds that you hear, and finally you move 3 body parts. So your ankle, your fingers, or your arm. I'm just throwing things out there, right? The other thing you can do is counting. And this helps by switching your hemispheres from an emotional place to a linear one. So you're going to count backwards, slowly, and out loud from 5. Because adrenaline triggers cortisol, and cortisol wants you to move. Remember, we call it the go hormone. You're going to try moving, even if it's just a little bit, like even if you just like tapping your toe or something like that. You want your body to be satisfied that it moved. So improving the lymphatics waste removal system by allowing the brain to shrink ever so slightly during sleep. You're going to laser the brain waves to help encourage delta brainwave strength specifically. But remember, we need them all to perform like an orchestra, so we balance all of the brain waves. Always remember, laser doesn't overcorrect, so the cost of doing them all has no potential side effect and would cost only a few extra minutes to do a full treatment. So we're going to make sure that the cerebral spinal fluid is beefed up by improving systemic hydration and encouraging exercise. lymphatic drainage techniques are some of the easiest and the most important tools in any practice with some of the most profound results. They're also excellent as homework. And as nothing in the body happens without a cascade of hormones to initiate a reaction, we should almost always perform a hormone balance for patients. And now you've done it all. You've addressed it all. So I am insanely grateful to be alive and working in this specific period of time. I believe that recent discoveries of lymphatics, along with new technologies such as photobiomodulation and fMRI, are simple and fascinating pieces of what I believe is a revolutionary new frontier in true healthcare. This stuff will affect every neurological disease and disorder that we currently know of. And by the way, remember we said that we still don't know the etiology of things like Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, and MS. So I believe that we're on the brink of the largest medical breakthroughs of the century. And I'm really, really grateful to be able to share it with all of you. Thank you so much for listening. And that's going to do it for me.